All right. Thank you all so much for joining us for our January 2023, I know what year it is, STC Florida chapter meeting. This is our problem solvers panel, and we're so glad you're here with us. Just a quick review of our agenda. We had our networking from 6:30 to 7, so thank you all for joining and chatting about, what's going on in our lives and in TechCom news. So we've got a few slides just of a welcome from the chapter, and then we'll be getting into our panelists, letting them introduce themselves, and then we'll just go through some moderated Q&A. So without further ado, welcome from the STC Florida chapter. So my name is Bethany Aguad. I am the president of the chapter. We are a community in the Society for Technical Communication, now representing all of Florida. We used to have several communities in Florida, but we joined over time. And now in our days of remote connectivity, we're excited to welcome people from other states. I know we have a couple here. So you are Floridians with us while you are here. Well, to clarify, if you want to be, so you might not want to be honorary Floridians. That's also fair. So we host regular educational programs and other member benefits. And if you have any questions throughout, feel free to put things in the chat, or we'll definitely have it open for Q&A later when the panelists are up. So just a little bit of chapter news. I think I'm handing it to Julia.
Yes, I am the chapter vice president, communications chair, and newsletter editor. And as newsletter editor, I run memo to members. If you have any article ideas, or if you need an idea, please see our ideas page. I have the link in chat for you, along with a couple other links. And you can send your articles directly to me at newsletter@stc-orlando.org. If you missed last meeting or want to catch up on any previous meetings, we have them on our YouTube page conveniently in a playlist for your viewing pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Julia. Julia wears many hats. So basically, if you ever need anything, if it's not mine, it'll be Julia if it comes to volunteering with the chapter. We just want to highlight a few of our upcoming meetings. We do have a joint event with the Future Technical Communicators Student Club at UCF for those who are in the Central Florida area. They're having a social at Congo River Golf in Orlando. For those who are not in Florida, I'm sorry that we don't have a way to remotely bring you to that event, alas. But that is going to be this coming Saturday for those who are interested. For our remote friends, we have next week our Madcap Flair Tips and Tricks meeting. This was originally scheduled with our presenter Scott Deloach for September, but due to some scheduling issues and a late hurricane, it's now scheduled for next week. So if you paid for this meeting, you can also attend that one. And it's going to be really good because Scott is the guy who literally wrote the book on Madcap Flair in a literal sense, not just a figurative one. So he's going to be giving an overview of the application and then some more advanced direction for those who are using it at work. We also have, sorry, Julie, did I steal your slide?
I don't know if this is my slide. Keep going.
Okay, sorry. I just suddenly realized. Julia, as vice president, is our program planner. So just to clarify, I'm sharing events. Julia has done the work to set these up. So please give kudos to Julia for her program planning. Next month, we have a joint event that we do annually with the Future Technical Communicators Student Club at the University of Central Florida, where they're having a young professionals panel. So it's going to be people who have graduated the past couple of years who will be answering questions about their transition into the field, sharing their experiences, because I know for many of us who have been in TechCom for a while, the environment has changed. And especially with the pandemic, what it's like to enter the workforce has changed, even especially in the past few years. So they have a unique perspective on this interesting era we are in and what it means to be a technical communicator. So that'll be a really good presentation for those who are looking to either enter the field of TechCom or who are just interested to see what it's like for people entering the field now. So that'll be next February, and that's also going to be on Zoom. I didn't put on here, but there'll be news coming for March, which is our annual employment panel, where we have recruiters and hiring managers coming to answer questions about what they're looking for when they're hiring technical writers or any of the other myriad of job titles that apply to our profession. I want to highlight a couple of volunteer opportunities with the Florida chapter. So if you're a member of our chapter, we'd love to see you even beyond our regular programming and our networking meetings. Right now, we are especially looking for an employment chair and a membership chair. Our employment chair is the person who's responsible for connecting recruiters and hiring managers with technical communicators in our chapter. We've been blessed in the past with some really active employment chairs who communicated directly with recruiters, gathered information, presented that to chapter members, and it was a really great resource not only for our members but also for the people on the the other side who are looking for talented candidates in the world out there, where you can put a job on LinkedIn and get 500 applicants who might not be qualified for a job. It's also a great position if you're looking to be the person who's making those connections for yourself at some point. It's great, you're cultivating those relationships, and it's a good thing to have in your toolkit. We always hope that everyone will be in a job for as long as they want, but you never know when things might change, so it's always good to be ready. The other is our membership chair, so that's someone who is helping us remain connected to our members, uh, whether that's checking in with people who we haven't seen for a while, finding new ways to make our membership valuable, to connect with our community. This is a role that we're really looking for someone who would like to help us transition, because we know we're in a time where originally we used to meet only face to face, then we were hybrid, now we're on Zoom, and now we're kind of navigating perhaps returning to some things face to face. So it's going to be an interesting time for our membership and our community, and looking for someone who has new ideas and energy. So if either of those things sound interesting to you or you have more questions, I'm going to put my email in the chat, and I would love to hear from you if you have time and or interest, because we're always looking for people who want to be active with the community. It's how I started, and I'm still here a decade later, which sounds like a lot to me, but we'll hear from some folks later who will put me to shame with their STC commitment. So I put a quote from Mark Twain here, which is, "Writing is easy. All you have to do is cross out the wrong words." I thought that was funny because it's one of I think it harkens back to things probably some of us have heard about our work from people who are not part of our profession. And just to give a little background on this event, this is the brainchild of W.C. Weiss, who's with us, as an opportunity for people who have more experience in the field to help people who are new or who are going through some challenges get some advice and direction for how to address, especially navigating relationships with other teams, perspectives on our work with people who don't necessarily understand what we do intuitively, or they think they understand it intuitively, but have oversimplified our value. So I think we have really great panelists tonight who will be able to provide some insight into navigating some of those challenges. And hopefully, as we go on in the future, our profession will receive greater and greater accolades for what we do is very valuable. But perhaps when we do our jobs well, it looks easy. So I think without further ado, I've got a slide for our panelists for tonight. So panelists, I'm going to be pinning your videos, or no, I'm going to spotlight your videos. So give me a second while I make sure that everyone will be able to see you. Oh, Lori, if you're still working, I won't pin your video yet. Other Lori M. Okay, sorry. We have two Lori panelists. I'm sorry. Can you be Lori C and Lori M for tonight? Is that all right?
Yeah, I'm happy to be Lori M.
Okay.
So
I'm not using my maiden name.
Oh, oh no. Well, at least for now, we'll do Lori C and Lori M. So I just quickly was going to introduce everyone by name, and then panelists, we've got just a few things we'd love for you to introduce yourselves before we get into questions, so that you have a chance for people just to get to know a little bit about you and your background. So we have Joe Ryan, who came to us through the mentoring program and has been I would say, a lauded mentor with nothing but the greatest reviews from all of his mentees. And I'm saying, sorry, I realize that sounds sarcastic. It's incredibly genuine. People have wonderful things about to say about Joe, and we're very lucky to have him. We have Lori Corbett, who we briefly came to visit Florida. Then she left, and then she's back. She's been a leader in the chapter for a long time, and now she comes and graces us with her presence, so we're always happy to see her. And then our other Lori is Lori Meyer, who's joining us from the far, far land of California. Lori is an STC board member, so she can't favor us in any way over any other community, but we like to think that she likes us best. So we're very glad that Lori's here with us tonight. So I guess if you don't mind, Joe, I might call on you first, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your experience.
Oh, let's see. Okay, so I'll go through your list here.
If you'd like, you can skip anything that you don't think is relevant.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Education, I'm a first generation college graduate. I grew up in an area that was mostly trades, and so I did it myself, and it took a long time. I did everything in stages. So now I have my MBA, and it feels good, to finally have it under my belt. And that's it for me. I'm not going any further.
MBA sounds pretty good, I think, to most of us.
Yeah, it's not so bad. And then years of experience. I have about 40 years of experience in business and technology and tech writing. And I totally got into it by accident, like a lot of people do. But it's been a good career for me, and I enjoy it. My current job, my title is program analyst and team lead. I'm with the U.S. Census Bureau. I lead a team of tech writers and trainers. So we develop a lot of training, and we'll talk about it later, but fighting with a lot of documents, a lot of legacy content. So it's been a challenging position. I have not been a member of STC consistently, so I am not actually a member right now. But I do enjoy helping out, where I can. So it's been good.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Joe. And you've been a very active mentor who's had many mentees in a short time. So we're very grateful for Joe.
They're awesome. They're
Yeah.
awesome.
All right, Lori C. If you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Lori Corbett. I originally from New York City. Education, I went to Barnard and I have a degree in economics. I started out going for biochemistry. I really love science, and my cousin was head of biochemistry at Harvard. And when I got past organic chemistry, I'm like, I'm not as smart as Jack. Let's figure out something else. Economics was an easy major to fulfill. I could do it in 2 years, so I did, and I got my degree. And while I was going to school, I did typesetting on the Columbia Spectator, which was a daily paper. So I learned about typesetting. That's in the olden days when it was on, it wasn't hot metal, but it was on film. So there was no such thing as word processing in those days. So then I need to speed this up. I got in New York. I was able to make really good money as a typesetter, like $45 an hour. And back in 1970 something, that was really good. So I did that, and then my husband got an offer of a job in Charlotte, and they paid typesetters nothing. So I did get a job as a typesetter at a company that did contract work for IBM for documentation, and they brought in an editing class, and I took the class and I took the test and I scored the highest in the company, and they said, "Oh, you're in the wrong job." Which was true because I was fixing stuff as it came across to my typesetting area. So I started working as an editor. This might interest you, Marissa. I did work as an editor, and it was really good, really easy to do. And they liked me, but they didn't give me any raises or any promotions. So after a year, I said, I quit, and I started doing contract work. And I did contract work at a lot of places. I joined STC, this is 1988, and it gave me a network. It gave me opportunity to volunteer to do certain things like newsletter types of things and communication things. And people got to know me. And one of the jobs I got as a typesetter still was to work at Harris Teeter Supermarkets. And while I was there, Mr. Harris called in and was asking if they knew any writers who could help him work on his autobiography. And everybody looked at me. And I ended up helping him write his autobiography. He just needed somebody to listen to him, and I did. But I moved on to different contract jobs. And then we ended up, this was in Charlotte. My dad had moved down to Florida and I wanted to be closer to him. So we moved to Florida. That's when I came in 94 to Central Florida and started getting active in the Society for Technical Communication there and in the Orlando chapter. And I was really excited, really worked a lot on when we used to do the conferences every year, I helped coordinate them. And I had I think I had every role except vice president. I was president. The year they had the seminar, the conference in Charlotte, I was a support manager. So, and I'm a big advocate of growing your network. I mean, everybody I know still know me, right, WC? And I've convinced some people who I thought when they were going to run for president weren't quite ready. And I would, a lot of times I would run for a position when I didn't think the right people were in it or people were in it too long. And then I would grow the team and then people would take over and we did well. So that's how I've done that. So years of experience. Yeah, I all through my time of being contract, I've always maintained my membership in STC, and now it's a requirement of my company to pay my membership, and they even pay for my Florida chapter membership.
That's wonderful.
That's been a good thing. But back when I was a contractor, it was lovely because everything's deductible.
The pro tip.
And finance is not something I'm unfamiliar with, so I'm good with this. So now I work in taxes and sales tax, and I work actually computer configurations. So your company may use for their sales management services, they may use a Microsoft product, an Oracle product, an SAP product, and we do the taxes. And if you buy something on Amazon and you go to check out and they automatically your sales tax comes up when you put your address in, they're getting that from our system. And I help write the guide to set up that configuration. So that's what I do.
All right.
Oh, I've been everything. Yeah, I've been on the board. I was on the STC board back in, when was it, 2006, 2007? I wasn't in Florida when I was on the board. I had moved up to Pennsylvania by then. Yeah.
When you were saying you'd held all the roles in the chapter except vice president, I was starting to think you were going to announce that you were going to run for vice president and try to take it away from Julia. She was just saying that she wants to be VP unless someone else wants it.
No. I'm not. I think I'm finished with my official roles.
No, we're grateful to have you here with us, Lori. Lori C. Lori M., do you mind introducing yourself?
Oh, not at all. Hi everybody. I am Lori Meyer. I am based out of Northern California. I went to undergrad school in Buffalo, New York, and I went to grad school in Rochester at Rochester Institute of Technology. I have my MS from there in instructional technology. And at the time, RIT did not have a TechCom program, but this was pretty close, and there's a lot of crossover. So it was a good program, and I'm really glad I did it. I've been in the TechCom profession for more years than I want to think about sometimes. I'll just say more than 2 decades and leave it at that. I started out as a technical editor and then went to technical writer. I've been a project lead. I've never been actually a real doc manager, but I've led a number of projects over the years. My current job is I work full-time as a tech writer in a cybersecurity firm, and I document enterprise software for data protection and threat management and other forms of security. And very complicated product, but really fascinating too. So I've been doing this for a few years. In STC, well, it would take an awfully long time for me to go through my STC volunteer history, but let's just say I've assumed just about every role in an STC community, from chapter president and SIG manager all the way down to just part-time volunteer. I'm currently on the STC board of directors for a 2-year term. I'm just finishing up my first term. I am chair of the STC Community Affairs Committee this year, and that committee's charter is to, form liaisons between chapters and special interest groups and the STC office to make sure that the communication is flowing well between the two entities, and to make sure that communities are getting the assistance and the encouragement that they need from STC. And I've had a chance to talk to a lot of community leaders, and it's a great role. And we will be at the Summit 2023 conference in Atlanta this year. And if you're going to Summit, we're going to have a couple of sessions in the afternoons on, I believe, Monday and Tuesday. So we hope you'll be able to join us. I currently am a member of, okay, this is going to sound nutty, 15 STC chapters. And I'm also a gold member, so I belong to all the special interest groups. So I know these communities quite well, and it's a very gratifying experience to have gone through that. So it's nice to be here, and I look forward to people sharing their problem solutions.
All right. Okay. So I think we're moving into our open question. So if everyone, feel free to unmute if you have a question for our panelists. If there's ever a lull, I have infinite questions. Well, not literally, but naturally, I have lots of things I'd like to ask these folks. So, but I will pause. Is there anyone who has a question you'd like to ask our panelists, either generally or anyone specific? All right, then I'll go ahead. Oh, WC has raised his hand. Oh yes, sorry. Thank you for WC for remembering the hand raise function. Please feel free to use that if you would, if you'd like.
I'm demonstrating that for the rest of the chapter community. Actually, beautiful. I've always wanted to ask this question because I don't think it came up in previous iterations of the problem solvers panel, and I regret very much that we don't have a larger and younger audience to appreciate the knowledge that's available to us tonight. But let me ask the question that I always expected to hear, and I don't think we did, and that is, what do you do when you're working with an author or an SME who's particularly difficult to get along with?
Great question.
Well, let me go. I've worked with some, as an editor, with some writers who were very kind of combative about any marks that I might make. And I got to the point where for most edits, I would put an explanation in there. And that's how I worked with it. And believe it or not, I'm thinking of this one writer that I worked with in Charlotte, and he was horrid. But believe it or not, when I got laid off, he was the first writer to call me and thank me for all I had done to help him.
Super.
So be prepared to back up anything that you do with reasons and be reasonable about explaining it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lori or Joe, and any thoughts on?
Well, I think when someone, is either abrasive or difficult to work with or just stubborn or whatever the, issue may be, I try to, number one, make sure that when they do talk to me, that they know I have listened to them. So what I do frequently is when they tell me something, I will play it back to them and say, so what you're saying is this, this, and this. Is that correct? And if I'm lucky, they will give me a quick verification. Yes, that's right. Or if they kind of start going off on a tangent again, I'll go back and say, so I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So I just keep I kind of go into broken record road to let them know that I'm seeking their understanding because I want to get it right on their behalf. So I take it as far as I can there, and I always thank them for whatever input they give me, even if it's been a pretty, negative experience with communication. But the last thing I want to do is, project my own, personal feelings of hurt or frustration onto them, because that really isn't their problem, even though there may be ways that they could communicate better. I've got to leave that out of the equation for that period of time. And so I just try to remember after I talk with them, and if I'm feeling frustrated or put off or whatever, I just try to analyze what went on here, so that I can kind of diffuse myself and not feel like I want to avoid talking with them or whatever. And I do try to just send a quick follow-up on instant message or email, just saying, here's what we talked about. Is this correct? And so sometimes that tends to diffuse a difficult situation. Other times it doesn't work, but you just have to do the best you can. And I have had that experience too, where some people I thought were, you know, I wasn't one of their favorite people, did thank me for contributions I made or insights I gave them or whatever. So that's always a pleasant surprise. So you never know.
Yeah, thank you, Lori.
Well,
It's always nice when you find out people think well of you, and then you're like, why don't we all just tell each other we think well of someone to their face more often? Trying to get better at
good.
that myself.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I always, whenever I put something out for job review, for example, I always thank my reviewers for, even if their comments were cryptic or, not quite enough or something, the fact that they even looked at it and touched it is, worth something to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, did you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think a lot of times we have to understand what's behind it. So, it's a little easier if you work with the same group all the time, like a smaller startup or something like that. I think it's easier to understand the people you work with and what their background is and what kind of things frustrate them, and then you can kind of manage that. But I've definitely seen a shift over the past few years with COVID, where people who were normally pretty agreeable have seemed agitated and all that. And we've had to keep in mind, and I remind my team of this too, while working remotely has been great for a lot of us who really enjoy working remotely, it's a huge strain on a lot of other people, and we don't know what's going on in their homes. Like we had, one person, and she was being really difficult, and she hadn't been before. And it turned out just when COVID hit, they were about to put her dad in an assisted living facility, but then they abandoned that at the last minute because they were worried about whether he'd receive good care, he'd end up with COVID. So she was trying to care for him in addition to working. So everything you asked her was a distraction, and she was, agitated well before we even interacted with her. So just understanding, what's behind the frustration or anxiety someone feels. With developers, I find they not as much now as it used to be, but they used to think it was just such a bother to have to talk to a tech writer, that it was just kind of like junk work that, didn't really do anything. And in those cases, I always made sure that I went in, knowing exactly what I needed from them and assuring them that I was going to take up as little of their time as possible. And, again, it just depends on the situation, I think, and what's behind it, what's the frustration.
Yeah, sounds like treating people with humanity is important, no matter what's going on.
Yeah.
Jessica, you have your hand raised.
Sure, this should flow because my first thought when WCU asked the question was, well, how are they difficult? Because, and then I realized this is a good question, because I have definitely, because of my sense of humor, I've definitely been able to connect with people personally, but I find like it's literally when we get to one area that they're difficult. You know, like, and that has always been the challenge when you have to shift from having a personable conversation to, and I'm guilty of it too. You're just wrong. Or you know, it's um th- how should I put this? This is my job, not yours, kind of thing. Where you're just saying, I appreciate that. You know, it's there. I find that very interesting because at least in my experience, I can get along with the person, even if they're going through a rough time. It's just literally when we get to a sticking point about an area of the job. Like I was wondering about advice on that because I do find myself thinking, well, this is awkward. We were just having a wonderful conversation until we started talking about what we're actually supposed to talk about. And that personal relationship doesn't seem to be helping us on that. So I'm just curious if what I'm saying makes sense and if you had any ideas.
Is the question what to do with situational conflict, even if the relationship with the person is good?
My goodness, Bethany, it's almost like you should be a communicator. That was a great way to sum up what I was saying.
Oh yeah, no problem. Just want to make
I-
sure I
No, it's
understood
great.
too.
No, it's good. It's just sometimes we can connect personally and have that compassion, which is what I think you guys were just advising. It's just literally then when we get back to the sticking point about a work issue, we're right back there. And it's, I guess, another thing. How would you leverage that personal relationship into that work situation? I do struggle with that.
It's a great question, Jessica. Everyone's pondering.
Or it just wasn't clear enough. I know exactly what I mean, but it's kind of a very nuanced version of the question that was just asked. So if we need to pass that.
No, Bethany, if I can, so
Go ahead.
no, I think this is a great point because I think we come across this all the time, and I'm like you. I have a good sense of humor. It's easy for me to build relationships with people typically, but then you do come across those sticking points where you're like, come on, what is this? I mean, you're not really sure about the rationale behind it or what's happening because you feel like you typically have a good relationship with this person. So, I think the issue with these kinds of scenarios is they're situational. So you really need to understand the dynamics of the people involved and the specific scenario. Like, my thought is that you would be able to lean on, building on what Lori Corbett was saying earlier about networking. I see so many tech writers who just want to kind of sit down in a hole and not interact with anybody. And I think that's gone away a lot because now we're part of project teams and that sort of thing. And that's good because the reality is, we're always asking for something from somebody. So we're dependent on other people. And if you build those relationships and you build those networks, it makes it a lot easier to ask for something from somebody. And I think if you're a person who has a good sense of humor, that also helps because, you can laugh off some of these tough situations, depending on how solid your relationship is with somebody. You may be on, the kind of terms where you can just be really abrupt with them and say, what in the world, what's going on? It just, again, I think it's just so dependent on the people involved in the situation. That's just my take.
Yeah. Context matters. Sorry, we have a cat on screen.
Absolutely.
so if we're all smiling, but we appreciate your answer, and also we're watching a cat. I guess either of the Loris, and any thoughts on I guess when you hit a moment of conflict with someone, even if you have a good relationship with them?
I do try to be sensitive to when that's happening because if I have a good history with someone and all of a sudden they seem either distant or more easily annoyed than usual, I try to assume that there's something going on that has nothing to do necessarily with me. but there may be something in their life that's going on, or they may have gotten bad news about their job, or they might have had a conflict with their own manager or something like that. So I try to make that assumption so I don't take the whole thing personally and just say, well, they're being rude to me, even though I try to be honest with myself if I'm feeling, put off or disturbed by the change. But I try not to make that part of the current dynamic that I've got with them. And that's not always easy, but I think it's worth it in the end.
I'm a strong believer in leading by example and leading by quote unquote walking around. So
Yeah.
back when we were in the office, I would walk around and just talk to somebody by the coffee machine or by their desk. I believe in work is not all work. You need to understand people and understand where they're coming from. And if they perceive that you understand them, they are more likely to be receptive to you. And it's worked out well for me, I gotta say.
Well, there you go. Thank you guys. Different, I think, angles coming kind of at the same thing, which is treating people with kindness is the most important thing, and otherwise you just gotta let it roll off you. It sounds like when things do occur, because some of that is inevitable.
Well, one thing that I put a little sticky note on my computer, that's with the words golden rule on it, because no matter how frustrated or angry I get, I don't want to project that out to other people. And if I see these words golden rule on my computer, I'll find some other way to vent my frustration, because I want to really treat people the way that I would want to be treated.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And welcome, Andrew. I was just putting a note in a chat. We're in our Q&A section. So if you have questions for our panelists, let me know. I'm actually going to walk it back a slide just so you can see the just a little bit about our speakers. So Lori, Joe, and other Lori. We have two Loris, and you can decide which Lori is other Lori amongst yourselves, are here answering questions. So any other questions in the chat? Or I don't think in the chat, any out loud.
I was actually thinking about your question, Jessica. If it's like a specific issue in a specific document where I don't understand why such and such needs to be this particular way or something like that, just sit down with them and say, okay, this seems to be a sticking point for us. Here's why I think it needs to be in this specific way. And just see if you can explain it to them and have them explain to you why they think it needs to be the way they want it. And see if you can come to some sort of conclusion that way.
Either that or you challenge them to a duel with pistols at sunset.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, there you go. Less practical virtually, unfortunately, for challenging someone to a duel. Yeah, it was a great question. Thank you for asking, WC and Jessica, following up on that. Do we have any other questions that are on someone's mind? Otherwise, I certainly have one for our panelists. And if you're feeling shy and don't want to speak up, you also could put your question in the chat and I will read it out for you. So I guess a question that, or a problem that I hope I have temporarily solved, but I'm sure I'll have to solve again in my career, is how do you know when it's time to look for a new job? Like, what are the signs for you that, you've reached a point where either you're not being promoted or you're not growing your skills? I guess since you guys have had long careers, I'm curious how you've navigated that. Or if you're like, I'll just wait for them to lay me off, because that was all my early jobs. I just got laid off every time and that made it easy.
I'll throw a few things in here. First of all, I think that you always kind of need to take your own temperature as far as where you are in your daily work and in your career. And it's like, am I learning new skills? You know, do I have the respect of my coworkers? Do I treat them with respect? You know, and do I get that respect in return? Have I been exposed or talked to about opportunities to not just improve, but really, you know, develop myself, develop my skills, you know, all of those things. Those are good ways to kind of take your professional temperature. And if you are coming up with doubts about any of those questions, you know, it's probably time to do a reexamination of what are the obstacles, what are my alternatives, what are my choices, and what do I want to do? What would give me satisfaction? Because even though sometimes, and I think this is true in our profession, maybe a little bit more than in somewhere, we kind of have to feel that we have to be grateful for a job or prove our value every day or something like that. And I would recommend just keep an eye on your own satisfaction, because that is not trivial. It will, if you are satisfied with the work you're doing, you're feeling proud of it, and you know that you're doing everything to learn and grow, that's going to have a positive impact on your performance. And, you know, so, you know, it's just important to kind of just be mindful of what's going on from day to day. You know?
Great. Thank you, Lori. Definitely good to, I know we kind of have a theme now of acknowledging not just others' humanity, but our own as well, and not just seeing ourselves as human capital, who are machines made to earn money, which I think could be a powerful force. So good to consider how you feel about your work too.
I agree with what Lori said, but let me add this. I had this job. I started out as a contractor and I let them hire me on as a direct employee. The manager I worked for had a 180 shift from when I went from contractor to employee, and she became impossible to work with. So I started looking around for other jobs while I was working there. And I finally, after a few weeks, I quit because she was interfering with my job search.
Wow. That's terrible. Well, that seems like a really good sign to leave. Oh my goodness.
That was amazing. And that company no longer exists, by the way.
And are you saying you had a hand in that? I'm just kidding.
No, I had
No.
no hand in it, but there were probably other issues going on. Maybe she was,
Yes.
you know, from the other side, getting
Mhm.
some things that made her become impossible to work with.
Mhm.
I don't know, but I do know that just for my sanity, I had to leave.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we have a message in the chat. Never let them know your next move.
Oh, they didn't know when I was, you know, but it was starting to interfere, so I was like, forget it.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Joe, do you have any thoughts on job transitions?
Well, most of my career I was a contractor, so that made it a little bit easier. You know, because as far as like my personal mindset went, you know, I didn't see it as long term. But even still, I mean, I got into some positions that were toxic and I knew were not healthy for me. And, you know, just like Lori Corbett said, I immediately started looking for something else and got out of that situation. It breaks my heart when I see people stay at jobs either because they feel like they can't get something else, or you know, they keep giving it more time, maybe they don't really want to look for another job, but the toll it takes on us when we're at a job we don't like, whether it's because of the people or the demands of the job or whatever, you know, it's not healthy. And I hope that's another thing that's kind of come out of all this stuff with COVID is just, you know, like Lori Meyer said, taking a temperature and making sure that we're doing what's right for us and that this is part of our whole life, or, you know, our complete health. Big difference, I think.
No, that makes sense. And it's interesting how, our attitudes about work are shaped by, our upbringing and everything. And, if you think you have to work 60 hours a week, or if you're happy to work your 40 and clock out. I'm trying to be a work 40 and clock out person. I really am. It's a struggle. uh, do we have any other questions?
Actually, I was just typing
Oh,
the question, do technical writers work a lot of overtime? Is that
It's a
sort
good
of
question.
normal or depending on the project?
Depending on the company.
Yeah.
It's a mixture of all those things, actually, because I don't know any technical writer that hasn't had some big crunches where they had to work way, way late into the evening, and if, if you're fortunate, that's not a real common occurrence. It's once in a while. I think the problem emerges when that's either a daily or a pretty regular occurrence and you're starting to lose sleep and
Yeah.
and you're not eating right or whatever. Those are warning signs. But I think sometimes the crunches and the a few late nights or something once in a while is kind of goes with the territory in our profession. The software is very unpredictable. I mean, sometimes there are last minute changes that come up and you don't have any choice but to kind of scramble when that happens. So if everybody understands that, you've got good support from your team and your manager, then it's easy to kind of get through that. And then when it's all over, you can celebrate and say, hey, I did well with that. But it's just that when it's a relentless grind that it can be problematic.
Yeah, because it gets to be unhealthy at some point. You gotta have a work-life balance too. Try to. I have
Where I
another
work
quick.
now, we
Oh.
have something called flexible time away. They have unlimited PTO, and then they call it flexible time. But also, if I work overtime, like the regular working week is 37 and a half hours, but I usually work between 40 and 45. But I've also been known to take an afternoon and just use some of those hours and throw them in there. So it didn't look like I was even off. But they're very accepting of it.
So sometimes you're saying you get lucky and your company is permissive and lets you live your life a little bit.
Like this week, tomorrow, I'm going to stop working at 2 because I need a pack.
And then you'll be jet setting away. Joe, how about you? Thoughts from your time, especially as a contractor? I know it can vary depending on where you are.
Yeah, it can, but I mean the good thing about, well, when you're a contractor, that it depends on the situation, but most of the contract positions, it's a set 40 hours, so it's what you get done in that 40 hours and then you're done. Even where I am now at the Census Bureau, we have to have a really good reason for someone to work additional hours. Now, like Lori Corbett is saying, for my team, I tell them, if there's something you need to do it, and I'm not someone who likes to have to watch every minute of every day and see where somebody is and negotiate every time you need someone to put in a little bit of extra effort. But I've been fortunate that I've got a great team, and especially now, if we're still at home indefinitely at this point, so if they need to run to a school function or run to the grocery store or pick up whatever, do it. Is exactly what you're saying, Marissa, about work-life balance. That is key, and more than anything, I want my team to be happy and healthy and feel well supported. So that's paramount to me.
So you're saying unhealthy, stressed out people don't do the best work?
Right. That's exactly what I'm saying in a lot more words.
Yeah. And Marissa asked in the chat if most everyone is working remotely. I guess it's maybe to different degrees.
Yeah. Good.
All
I'm
right.
the other way around. I want to go back into the office because I haven't been in the office for 2 years. I've just been studying at home, and I think for me, the ideal is the hybrid. Hybrid would be perfect. Spend some time at the office and work some time at home. So so you get to see people also, and, you know, interact with your team and stuff like that. I think that's
Well, more and more companies are
ideal.
expecting people back in the office to some degree. So I think we'll see that there's going to be different opportunities, a different
Right.
mix in the coming
Yeah.
years. WC, you have your hand raised?
I do. I wanted to comment on the overtime question. As you know, Dan Voss and I both worked in the defense industry for many, 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 many years. If we were unhappy, it took us a long time to figure it out. But most of the work that we did were new business proposals. In a world where you're surrounded with engineers, you're going to spend your day either in meetings or trying to track down inputs or all kinds of other arrangement things. So that if you're actually going to spend any time working on a document, you really have to do that after hours if you're going to be able to do it with any kind of continuity. If overtime bothers you, mine was not the job that you would want to have, but there are people who need to adapt to the group they're working with, and in many cases, we were kind of like it was our Olympic team competing against Raytheon in most cases. There was a lot of team pride in doing the job well. Dan probably pressed a little harder than I ever did in terms of the number of hours per week. But be aware that there are times that it's part of the job and you want to do it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I realize that because actually my background is in auditing. So I am used to, like, during tax season, it was, 50, 60 hours. If needed, you had to. So that doesn't bother me. I was just curious as to, if that's normal, how, if it's normal or if it's sporadic or what. So
I'll say
thank you for sharing.
I worked at the same company for 6 years, and I don't think I ever worked more than 50, and maybe that happened 3 times in 6 years. We just did 40, 42 hours probably, and it was nice overall. But it was also load servicing, so it wasn't the most exciting fast-paced environment, so things could move a little slower.
I put my response in the chat.
Oh, sorry, Lori, your audio sounded a little fuzzy, but Lori said you put a response in the chat. Oh, this was about remote work, saying that you have a team meeting a year to fly folks in for a week of meetings. But you said you like going in 1 day a week to do visiting?
I still go in 1 day a week, but I live 20 miles away, so that's not that big a deal. And it's a beautiful office.
Just for you, 1 day a week.
I look out at a pond. It's lovely. This is the thing behind me on the graphic image. That's the front desk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks beautiful. Do we have other questions?
Well, I was just going to tie a bunch of these things together that Marissa
Sure.
was asking, and just to say about the overtime. Yes, I concur with everyone else that sometimes that's just part of it. Overtime can become a reason that it's time to leave a job when it's constantly because of other people's mismanagement, bad planning. And when you have expressed like this is, how I was asking you for months for something, I didn't want to wind up here, because I have definitely had that crunch time happen when I was walking out the door for a vacation. And when I had planned and everyone knew months in advance. And so I learned over the years to say, well, I'll get it when I get back, because the only reason, the team was supposed to have been done like 6 months prior. And in that, when that kind of thing happens over and over again, I would definitely say that's when you probably need to look elsewhere. Like that, it ties all together, because overtime is sort of expected on a team, but when it becomes consistently I think you all know what I mean. Like when it's, you can just see that it's bad planning, people not knowing what they're doing, and then not attempting even to correct their behavior. And that will just, I remember I worked at a company where every time I tried to, express the plan, and she goes, well, I would hear the same story about how I wrote a manual in 72 hours, and I hadn't slept in 3 days, and I actually drove up on the curb in front of the company office because I was so exhausted or something. And I remember saying, like, that's not a bad, not to her, didn't say it, but I was like, that's not a badge of honor. And that is not an explanation, and that does not dismiss anything I'm saying. And she would just be like, uh-huh. And I was like, and I always wanted to know, what did that manual actually read like? Like, let's all be for real. And that was one of those moments where I was like, okay, my job here is to survive until I can find something else. And that may take 6 to 8 months, but depending, but that's when that's the kind of thing, because overtime is not a deal breaker unless it's constant like that. And it's always, well, we don't care if you have a vacation, you have to work overtime because we didn't plan. Do you know what I mean? And it's over and over again. I'm sure a lot of us have experienced that. So just was noticing how all of these questions tied up together right there.
That's basically the lack of planning on your part does not make it an emergency on my part.
Exactly. Never forgot that story about her driving up on the curb in front of the office. I was like, why? And I thought, that is a ring past nut. I'm not going to get anywhere with having this discussion, am I?
Mm-hmm.
So,
So, does anyone else have a question? Because if not, I have one. All right. So, folks who know me know I started a new job last fall, and I'm currently a documentation team of one as a manager without direct reports yet. Well, we hire direct reports, so it's been really interesting to come in and build up the documentation process. My question is, how do you go about setting expectations with other teams that you rely on for work? So not necessarily like individual SMEs, but establishing, here's what we can deliver based on what you're providing, or kind of navigating, I guess, sort of those cross-functional challenges, especially with software development, documentation kind of being at the end of the process.
I can, so this is something that we are actually battling right now on this project I'm working on. And it's difficult because you're telling people, why you need the things when you need them, but a lot of times they're not hearing you. I think a part of it from the technical communication standpoint is that people always underestimate what it is that we do. So I think that they think, oh, you're just gonna, write a couple manuals or build the help system, whatever. They think it's something quick that can happen at the end, and it's not always like that. So one of the things we do as much as we can with what we have to work with. So we don't wait until we get everything from everybody to start. Obviously, I mean, we start very early on in the project and start building things out, planning, all that. So in all of our meetings, we can share where we are in the process and try to make them understand, when you get me this system, as an example, this is what has to happen. This is what happens after you get it to me. This is how many hours are in the project plan for this. So, if you're delayed, we're going to be delayed. I mean, there's no way around it. So I think it's gotten better because, with so much project planning and I think more of the workforce understands project planning and how projects are managed. And I think that has helped quite a bit. But it is still a struggle. I mean, like my team is always so frustrated because, we're government, so we have a lot of forms. And they pretty much use the same forms over and over again. And yet every project, they they keep saying, oh, well, the form's not ready. Okay, well, it's going in all these different places. So, we need it. And, well, when do you need it? And, whatever we tell them, it's unreasonable. Well, we weren't going to work on that until next year. Well, so here's the problem with that. After you get me the form, these are the hours that go into, creating the product. So, it's just a communication issue. I think, everybody's always happy to shave time off other people's, schedule, but
Sure.
we don't want it to happen to us. So I think just standing our ground, and I think also establishing that you're credible at what you do, what you're doing, so when I tell someone how long it's going to take, they know now from experience that's how long it's going to take. I mean, we will do our absolute best, but it is what it is.
So it sounds like a little bit's about, establishing outcomes and also consequences. If I
Yeah.
don't receive this, everything will fall apart. Fire will rain down from heaven, or something to that effect. I'm just kidding. But
Yeah.
make it clear what
No,
the
and it's
consequences
so
will be.
hard because you don't want to seem negative, and you don't want to seem like you're throwing up obstacles. So I think it's always important to have metrics available to say,
Mhm.
this is not a guesstimate. This is actually how long it takes us to deliver this. So from the point when we get this, that's what happens. So yeah, it can get so frustrating, but
Yeah, I'd say I'm working with people in Poland. A lot of them are relatively young developers too, so they're really great at programming, but they haven't even really worked with a documentation person before, so they don't have that
Right.
shared understanding. And
Mhm.
sometimes it means they don't know how long anything takes, which means sometimes I'll get a 150-page document to review, and they'll be like, "What would that take? An hour?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
No, I can read it in an hour quickly, but I can't completely rewrite it. Or I'll get a 4-page document and they'll say, "Can you have it in 3 days?" Like
Right.
it's 4 pages. So probably I think some of that is maybe just an education as well, for at least on my side. So yeah, I appreciate the insight though that some of it is just inevitable friction though that'll just take some time.
It is. Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
either of the Lori's had thoughts, welcome back, Lori Meyer. I tried to put a quick
Okay.
summary of my question in the chat for you.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, one of the huge challenges that I've encountered over the years is people really do not understand what it takes to get something done. I had I think it was somebody in sales a few years ago, say, we're doing a demo in 2 days. Can you put together a manual? And it's like, okay, you're asking me to write a document from scratch in 2 days. And there was no way that I could possibly explain why, all the reasons why that's not possible. But I did write back and say, well, it sounds like you need a document of some type, not just a description or a couple of paragraphs, but you need an actual piece of documentation. So, I explained that that really is not something that we can do in that short a time. But if there's some sort of quick write-up that you need that I can help edit or work with you to just put some summary together, I'd be happy to do that. But if you need a document, we're going to have to do some planning. We're going to have to figure out what content's going to be. We're going to get it reviewed. And, it's going to have to go through some channels before we can consider that a legitimate piece of the project. And I think she kind of got it because she dropped her request for the manual. But, she just, she wasn't familiar with our work and how we do it, the process, the time investment required, anything. So that was and I knew that part of her, problem was just not knowing what we did, but she did not push back on me. She, said that she would just let me know what she needed, and then I never heard anything again.
It's a pretty good outcome then overall, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine is sometimes getting them coming back and saying, well, the customer says that they need it and they need it now. So it's, not my job actually to push back on the customer. So it's trying to get them feeling comfortable that that's pushing back on documentation is legitimate and not just some sort of excuse.
That's why it's good if you have a, a strong project lead and a good manager that you can communicate these issues to.
Mhm.
They can provide support for your position and help these people understand why we can't meet their needs in quite the way that they're asking for.
Yeah. Thank you, Lori. I saw Marissa put a question in the chat. I think it's a good question, so I'll go ahead and ask it out loud, which was, Joe, do you have to follow plain language in your work for the U.S. Census Bureau? So
We do, and it's a struggle.
I was gonna say, I can see the enthusiasm on your face.
We take, I mean, we're constantly taking training, because it's kind of an iterative process. You write what you're writing, and over time you get better at it, but you're always reviewing it, trying to slim it down and make it clearer and all that. So everything we do is constantly evolving, but we do try to use plain language, and it's a requirement for us. Yeah.
Right. Other questions for our panelists?
I can go back to what you were saying, Bethany.
Sure.
What my company does is we do percent deliverables. So the first one is just an outline, that's a 10%, and so on and so forth, to give not only something to give to the customer, but also to tell the SMEs, hey, this is what I can produce with the information you gave me and the time frame you gave me.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely am working on setting expectations for what can be delivered. If you need something in an hour, it's going to be very small if you want it that fast. Lori Corbett, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that topic.
My company in the past year has gone to agile methodology, and I personally hate it.
I think a lot of writers do. It doesn't naturally align with our way of working, I think.
And the developers have to put we're called the PCX groups, and they have to put an impact comment into their tickets so that we get notification on it. And it's just a pain in the what. That's all I know.
My company is also agile, so
And
I understand.
Because of my high level of knowledge, I've been put in the JIRA Align group, and oh my gosh, creating epics and features and yuck. I want to do my work. Let me do my work. I want to be productive.
Yeah, I'm putting a link in the chat in case anyone's not familiar with some of the words Lori's saying. You started talking.
Don't make me talk about it anymore.
No, I won't make you talk about it, Lori. Yeah, I also work in JIRA, so
yeah, that's
I understand. All right, Jessica Nealon.
Yeah, I didn't. This is sort of a question, but it's sort of tacking on to the theme you guys are discussing, where they're like, so can I get a 50-page manual in a couple days type thing. I just wanted to offer a tip, and also see if this has worked for any of you, because I find the fastest way to knock that down is to say, I've never heard of this product before, because very often it is. Now, sometimes they just understand the product in a totally different way. So we are actually talking about the same thing, but I don't know it. But I do feel free to say, I've heard rumors of that. I don't really have any idea what it is. And that you'd be shocked at how often that stops a request, because then at least if you're dealing with a smart person, they know you don't know it. And they sort of know that a couple of days is a ridiculous request for something you don't know and or don't have access to, because I've also had that too, where I don't have access to the product. I don't have it. Like I could literally, so when, and the only advice I would give is, if I can suss that out from the conversation, rather than going like before we even get to the thing we should do, and I'm sure this is in the STC certification manual, of discussing deadlines and and doing all the project management stuff. Like, this is probably going to be more effective when they know right off the bat, in a nice way, that I have no idea what they're talking about. And that has happened. And sometimes sometimes that will, sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes that will prompt a, I don't know, some guy in support said, you know, stuff. And then you realize this is not a request that anyone has thought through. And then anything you provide is helpful. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to,
Right.
just going right into the project discussion. I have definitely had that happen a few times where it's so obvious to everyone on the phone that I couldn't help even if I wanted. or sometimes you start to list, okay, well, can we get a VM set up, a virtual machine? Can we get the software loaded? Can we get the, and once you start to just list the stuff that isn't writing related, people will be like, oh God.
Oh, that sounds like work. And you're like, I know,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah,
work.
like,
It's not
yeah,
magic.
it isn't magic. It's not something I can pull out of my head, especially if it's brand new functionality that I've never even seen a spec on, which often can happen. So anyway,
Yeah, and there's a perception that our work is magic. I was trying to explain, like there's the story of like the elves and the shoemaker, where he just like leaves out the materials, the cobbler leaves them out, and then these elves come and make beautiful shoes, and there's just shoes every morning. And he's like, well, it's magic, but I'm just gonna not question it for a long time. And I think there's a perception that somehow we're these magical shoemaking elves, but with documentation, who gather up some materials and produce a fully formed
yeah.
product. So
Yeah, that was the only thing I didn't hear anyone say, because I think you probably work at companies that are a little more organized than mine is. I know that that's relative, but I know sometimes I'm like, you just sort of have to suss that out, and that's just the tip where you're like, before we even get to project deadlines and timelines and everything, because of course their deadline is right now. Let's just walk through the practicalities that have nothing to do, because they don't even want to. You can hear their eyes glazing over when I talk about writing schedules and projects and all of that. So
absolutely.
if you can tell that that's what it is, you could just sidestep all of that, and I will lower my hand because I see
WC is ready.
Yeah.
I was going to add that usually these last minute requests in my world would have, my response would have started something about, well, we need to estimate it. And do you have a charge number for me? And it's like lacking, any kind of financial resources or even a commitment to the project. That conversation really doesn't go very far after that. That said, in the case of a last minute manual, I might at least try to offer, say, an outline, so there'd be evidence of something for the customer to see. If it wasn't actually a proper manual, it would be the basis for a conversation going forward where the right thing did happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. Alas,
Correct.
I'm
and if you have written some kind of draft, I will do that too. I said, look, I think I know what you're talking about. I've wrote a few paragraphs. Here you go. Is that close? Are we on, are we even talking about the same thing? So yeah, definitely that too. That's great.
Yeah. No, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, I'm working for a small software startup in agile methodology, so I don't have a charge numbers, alas, to fall back on.
I know. I just had that. WC, you said that, and I felt like
Sounds
it was
powerful.
like, yeah, it was like Dreamweaver from like remember that movie? Gosh, I'm dating myself now. But it was just like the stars. I just had this like fantasy of shining sparkles where you could actually say something like that and it would mean something. That's fantastic.
You need more bureaucracy. That's what you need.
It does provide some protection, right? The bureaucracy, at least in setting expectations.
Well, if you're not going to get paid, that's even less reason to do it.
Right. Yeah. Fair point. All right. We've still got a few minutes left. Any other questions that folks have for our panelists?
Not exactly a question, but more just a heads up. WC, my mentee has a question for you. I will be sending that probably either later tonight or tomorrow morning.
All right. Building hype for the
Getting
well, I guess it's not exactly a question, but Marissa brought up earlier when we were on networking about what job titles people have. And I'm curious what our esteemed panelists think about the vast proliferation of content, writing, communication, documentation, etc. titles exists in our profession, some of which describe very similar jobs and others that do not.
I think that a lot of these newer evolved titles have resulted from, you know, a concern that we have to show our diversity and our value, and that those things are definitely important. But unfortunately for me anyway, I think that the job description, the job title of technical writer has been kind of bashed around a little bit. And I don't mind being called a technical writer because I don't feel limited by it in the least, you know, because writing involves many different things. It involves crafting words, whether it's in a document, release notes, UX suggestions. You know, I've made tons and tons of UI text recommendations to our development team. That is all writing. It's all writing. And no matter, and as much as I support the, you know, the importance of diversifying your skills, adding to your skills, looking at things strategically as far as like what kind of content you're going to put together for a total picture, I support all of that. But in the end, our baseline is still writing. That's still essentially, it's the heart of what we do, because without writing, what else is there? You know, so that's the basis upon which everything else evolves. So I don't have a problem being called a technical writer. You know, I don't feel limited by it in the least.
The thing is, when someone is looking for a job and you see all these different titles, you wonder what does this person do versus what this other person does, and what does a content writer do versus a content developer? And that's when it gets all confusing, like, okay,
It does.
who does what? And, you know, unless they have, of course, a job description attached, then unless they have that, you have no clue. Okay, I know it's writing, but it's what kind of writing? I mean,
Right.
it's
And
just
The
Yeah,
developer
good
as
point.
being somebody who has to have more knowledge than just a straight writer. They have to be able to understand the system and figure it out for themselves, as opposed to the writer is working off of requirements that's basically telling them what's going on. That's one thing I said. I always, what I wanted to say earlier is I was what was I? Oh gosh. I was a tech writer 3, but I was an information developer before that. And I liked information developer better than just a tech writer 3, because I don't just write with words, I write with graphics. And graphics are very important because somebody may not have the system right next to them, or they need to visualize, am I in the right place? You know, you told me this, but what's it really supposed to look like? Oh, mine doesn't look anything like that. What's wrong? I'm very graphic centric. And that's why I insist on getting a test instance when I do documentation.
yeah, that makes sense. I also think there's some titles that have different interpretations depending on what industry you're looking at. And unfortunately, I think the word content is often used a lot in other types of writing, not technical writing, but also sometimes in technical writing. So that can lead to some of the confusion where you're like, this is clearly a social media driven job that's called content writer or content developer, when some people might use that for technical writing. So unfortunately, I think that's part of the confusion, is there is no consensus across industries and HR teams, and sometimes also they're picking job titles that align with lower pay as well, at least in my experience. I don't know, Joe, if you had any thoughts on titles. Having been a contractor, I'm sure you've had your fair share.
Yeah, I mean, contracting was kind of weird because sometimes they would have a position, they'd be like, well, we don't have a tech writer position, but we have a business analyst position or something, you know, that didn't worry me so much. I mean, now where I am, everybody's like a program analyst or a statistician and tells you nothing about what they do. And we had one guy who was the head of a training branch, and the only position description he had was for a tech writer. So he kept advertising, and he'd bring all these people in and he'd hire them, and he'd be like, I don't get it. Why don't any of them know how to do training. And I'm like, you're hiring tech writers. And he said, same thing. I said, absolutely not. They're not the same thing. What are you talking about? And so, you know, we went through the job description. I'm like, this is a totally different position than you're advertising for. So, I mean, and we run into that all the time because they, you know, they'll ask us to do something and I'll say, okay, I don't have anybody to do that right now. Well, what about her? Well, okay, she's an instructional designer. She's not a tech writer. So that's not going to work. Well, why? Can't they all do it? No, they can't all do it. Gosh.
Unless you're Lori Corbett, you know, then
That's right.
then you can wear all the hats.
When I
Yeah,
worked at Disney, that's what I did. I wrote the training manual for using business objects, and then I trained it
yeah,
because they said, "Well, you wrote it, you might as well do it."
there you go.
I think also having been on both sides of the job description, often the people who are hiring positions have limited control over what goes into the job description as well. So that can be another challenge that even if there is a job description, it might not really be accurate.
No.
I know when I left my previous job, it took them 6 months to fill my position because the job description and title didn't match the work. So no one who was applying had any of the skills like being able to like write SQL code and stuff like that because it wasn't in there and everyone thought it was more of like a content management kind of job. So I don't think there's a solution from the outside to that problem that I'm
No.
aware of. Jessica?
I was just going to contribute that if you think the word content is bad, try going into I'm sorry, UX.
Mm-hmm.
You really want to put your head in a Cuisinart, because I think I'm very good at that, and I do write a lot of screen text, and I just find myself in that position, and I enjoy it a lot. Boy, do people not know what that job is, because you're going to be very confused, because what I find that what people are calling UX very often is a graphic designer that they expect to know how to write, and a lot of them just don't. And you're going to talk to once you're on the phone with someone from an ad agency, you know you're in the wrong spot. And you know, UX is, so I had to learn that the hard way, and this I think added a great deal to my stress. I was like, I need to can the job search until I understand. You know, like I need to ask clarifying questions. Yeah, and that's the other thing I saw, Andrew, your comment. UX UI is very popular, and it means everything. It's become a catch-all phrase for absolutely everything, which makes it very hard to understand what you're dealing with. And I think they almost want a graphic designer that can really write well. Like it's you can make the graphics, you can write the words, right? And it's sort of
Well, it's some people, they want a front end developer who can
right.
also do a bit of writing, and there's no graphic element.
It's the new, you know, I'm old enough, and Lori and Joe, not that I'm calling you old, but this should make you laugh, because the thing of like back in the day, just make it pretty. That's what we call that UX now. But I also wanted to just add something that really helped me consolidate it. And Lori, if this is something you just said, and I thought, oh my God, I just heard the perfect way to describe that. Someone was talking about the difference between two methodologies we use, one being push, one being pull. Push being when your SME basically pushes out a spec. And you were describing this as you're getting information that then you have to write, and you know, you're handed information. And they're saying that's the push methodology, and it often is something you receive from a BA, a systems analyst, some kind of SME, versus the pull methodology, which I realized that's how I need to describe myself, which is I get basically nothing. And my day is on the phone with developers, trying to sort through technical tickets. I just had one today where we were talking it through, and then I pulled up the ticket and said, thank God you called me, because this ticket is like someone's email. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. So and that very much describes the difference in job titles. And sort of Bethany picked up on what you said, and I was just telling, I'm sort of somewhat managing someone, and I've had to realize, oh, this is someone who's used to the push methodology, doesn't understand that you're not really going to receive information here. You have to embed. So I'm sort of training this person on how to be basically a fully participating member of a software development team. which is something I never even thought about, but that's just because I've worked so long without being handed the information or any information really in some cases. So anyway, I just thought that was a really great way to, if I'm ever in a job interview again, I'll say I'm more of a pull tech writer, or to describe it that way. That's a nice sort of encapsulation of those two different
I
methods.
like though if you say that you're embedded, because then it sounds like you're like a spy who's like behind
Yeah.
enemy lines. Like I'm embedded to, gather intel.
That is really true, and you really are.
It does
Because
feel that way sometimes.
I can't remember the last time I saw a decipherable spec, which is sad.
It really depends. So we're just a few minutes out. I think I don't see any outstanding questions. So I guess I just wanted to leave a few minutes in case any of our panelists had any closing thoughts that you'd like to share, or anything you'd like to highlight from what we've discussed.
Well, my recommendation would be to, no matter what the challenges in your job, or no matter what kind of, sometimes if you get, negative feedback and you feel like you're not adding value, I think the most important thing to remember is that I don't know one single person in our profession who is not doing something good and valuable, and they're working on things they can be proud of. And I think it's important, I've heard many times over the last 2 decades, we've got to prove our value. We've got to prove our value. And yes, we do have to make sure that our value is known and understood in our organizations, that I'm not minimizing that. At the same time, we have to believe, before we can convince anybody else of our value, we have to believe it. And I do believe it. I do believe that I'm here for a reason, and that I have something to contribute. And I think the more you can, move through your career with that feeling of, solid confidence in the value of what you do, you'll be willing to look for ways to even make it even better, add even more value. But you have to start with your own belief that you have something valuable to add. Otherwise, you're going to just be scrambling and begging for recognition and everything else. That's not what we want to do. Our profession is a profession to be very proud of.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. That's a really nice sentiment for us all to remember when we get bogged down in the day-to-day. Lori Corbett, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just want to add, don't be afraid to go to meetings. And don't be afraid to ask questions at the meetings when they say stuff that you go, what? That made no sense to me. Please explain. You will learn a lot. As the years go by, you may not have to ask so many questions, but don't be afraid to ask questions. And don't be afraid to get to know the entire team. We had on our last, where everybody came into the office for the meeting, we had a discussion about which meetings of projects we should go to. And the only one that was not included in the list was the daily stand-up. But the planning meetings, the looking forward meetings, the demo meetings, attend them all. You will learn a lot.
There you go. Thank you, Lori. And Joe, not to put you on the spot, but if you don't have to say anything, if you are all set, you could just say, I agree.
I agree.
Oh, beautiful. I'm with you, Joe. All right. We are at 8:30. I want to say thank you again to all of our panelists, the esteemed Loris and Joe, for bringing their wisdom and answering our questions. I also want to thank Julia for organizing the panel as our vice president. And thank you all for being here and bringing your questions. I appreciate it. I hope to see some of you next week for our Madcap Flare meeting. Just a reminder, that's next Thursday, same time. And otherwise, I'll hope to see you at upcoming STC meetings. So take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Super.